Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. This year has been tough on tons of relationships except for one New Yorker. It had been extra difficult because the pandemic revealed new sides of her boyfriend, a 34-year-old working in tech. Here's the 35-year-old publicist who wishes to stay anonymous, tells her story. In January 2020, my then boyfriend moved into my studio in Manhattan. We'd been dating for 9 months and things were going rather well. If I even have lived with a man before and that I was ready for him to maneuver in. But this was an enormous step for him because I used to be his first serious girlfriend. On paper, we made sense once we met. I remember thinking, this is Offman, who I've always pictured myself with. He checked all of the boxes. He's tall, features a great smile and wears stylish glasses, is successful and motivated in his career, features a really warm personality and an unusual sense of humour. We connected most over our love of food and cooking. On our second date, we went grocery shopping and made an enormous meal together. Things were going so well that just 4 months into our relationship, he introduced me to his parents. I used to be a touch surprised that he introduced me so soon, but I used to also be very happy. I'd never dated anyone who did that and have always craved being included to a family. Then, just after 2 months of cohabitation, COVID came to town, and like many couples, we transitioned to performing from home. It didn't last long. After a couple of difficult days with the two folks trying to form it, add such a little space, he told me he needed more room and was heading to his parents' house in New Jersey. His parents told him not to visit me, but he came twice anyway, though he refused to remain overnight. The infection rates were very high here at the time, so I understood. What I couldn't understand, though, is that he didn't seem worried within the least about me being alone in the city during the pandemic. The more I dug in, the more I discovered he had some issues I couldn't overlook, and it all started with masks. Being isolated in my apartment gave me time to, obsess over our relationship. With numerous other aspects of life missing, I had nothing to distract me from confronting the deeper questions I had about our potential future. The more I dug in, the more I discovered he had some issues I couldn't overlook, and it all started with masks. Early on in the pandemic, he didn't see the importance of wearing a mask, so he didn't buy one, employing a bandana instead. I didn't really understand why he didn't prioritise getting a true one. I feel he thought it wasn't worthwhile since he was under the impression that COVID-19 would pass. I felt like he wasn't taking the virus seriously and that I wasn't sure where he was getting his information about COVID-19. He would say things like, it's not so bad, it's only the naysayers that are saying it's worse than a flu. That basically upset me. My friend's stepfather died of COVID-19. Maybe he had never had a health scare in his family, but I used to be still shocked by his response. He made running errands together impossible. We might be ready to steer into a grocery and he would tell me he preferred to attend within the car instead of wear a mask. It had been annoying. He said it had been hard to breathe, he said. I wouldn't call him a vocal anti-masker, but it bothered me that I used to be the one taking over all of the risk by going into stores to urge supplies we both needed simply because he didn't desire going inside together with his face covered. There were other warning signs, but I used to be determined to form our relationship work. The idea of being single during an epidemic was a strong motivator. So at the start of this summer, I found us a 2-bedroom to share near where his parents lived. I went into the lease knowing the connection won't work out, for one, before we moved in. He told me he was getting to eventually move distant from New York City and that I never want to leave, so I made bound to hold on to my studio just in case. The mask was annoying, he said. It made it hard to breathe, he said. It felt like abdominally I might discover something new and unfortunate about him. At some point I checked the mail and it sparked something in my mind. I noticed that we hadn't talked about how we were getting to vote absentee within the upcoming presidential election. Once I mentioned how concerned I used to be about receiving my ballot, he blurted out that he didn't believe voting. Honestly, I used to be shocked. I assumed it had been because he'd registered to choose another state, but he elaborated, telling me, no, I don't believe in voting. I don't think it matters. Before that conversation, he had never really expressed his politics. He was always pretty neutral when politics came up. I had no concept because he was essentially a closeted non-voter. He told me he hadn't voted within the 2016 presidential election because he didn't feel strongly about one candidate or the opposite. He was ready to recognise that President Donald Trump isn't doing an honest job, but it wasn't enough for him to mention, I'm getting to take action and vote him out. As summer transitioned into fall, we tried to enjoy each other's company, but he kept revealing things I found hard to simply accept. We frequently have deep conversations while taking walks, and at some point, once we were out for a stroll, I asked him if he would get a COVID-19 vaccine once it became available. I used to be careful and specific about what I meant. I told him I knew I wouldn't be first in line to urge the shot. Healthcare workers and older people got to catch on first, and we'll likely have some concerns about safety, especially if Trump remains in office. I need to ascertain how others fare before getting it ourselves. But I said, you're getting to catch on eventually, right? That's once I learned he didn't believe any vaccine because he claimed he never got sick, which he had an excellent system. He did not recognise that he was vaccinated by his parents as a toddler. I got really upset and reminded him that the vaccine isn't almost him. He could have COVID-19 and not realise it. Then I asked if he was getting to get a flu shot. He told me he wasn't only not getting to get one, but that he hadn't had a flu shot in his whole adult life. I used to be surprised and appalled, but I used to also beginning to see a trend. If something didn't impact him directly, he wouldn't take it seriously or care. I now know that there are bigger areas you would like to be aligned on: health, politics, the way you see the planet, and therefore the other humans living in it. All of this made me think hard about our future. Did I actually want to marry someone who didn't care enough about me or others to wear a mask? Could I spend my life with someone who refused to exercise his right to vote? Did I actually want to possess a family with someone who wouldn't get vaccinated? Worse, with someone who won't want me to urge our youngsters to get vaccinated either. Since I ended our relationship, I've been thinking tons about what went wrong. Yes, the planet was entirely different 2 years ago once we met, but I also realise now that while my ex checked off tons of superficial boxes, they weren't the important ones. I do know now that there are bigger areas you would like to be aligned on: health, politics, the way you see the planet, and therefore the humans living in it. Now that each one of this is often behind me, I'm easing back to online dating. Since the time I used to be on the apps, I've noticed many have made a much-needed improvement. They now ask you to answer questions on how important things like politics and vaccines are to you. Maybe at some point soon they're going to ask about your stance on wearing a mask too. Thanks for listening. Please like, comment and subscribe.